bar was packed that Friday night, filled with the buzz of conversations and the occasional burst of laughter. I wasn't much of a drinker, but Sarah had insisted we meet her friends for drinks. "It'll be fun," she'd said, flashing me that bright smile that used to make me feel like the luckiest man in the world. Now that same smile made my stomach churn. She was sitting across the room, laughing too hard at some guy's joke. His hand rested casually on the back of her chair, and she made no effort to move it. I tried to convince myself it was harmless. She was a social butterfly, always had been. But the way her hand lingered on his arm as she leaned in to whisper something told me this was different. My drink sat untouched as I watched her, the knot in my stomach tightening with each passing second. A voice broke through my thoughts. It was Dave, one of my few friends who'd tagged along for the night. His eyes flicked toward Sarah and the guy, then back to me. "That's, not a great look, man." I didn't respond. What could I say? That my wife, my Sarah, was making a fool of me in front of everyone? That she didn't seem to care I was sitting just 20 feet away? The air felt thick, and every laugh from her direction felt like a slap in the face. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked over, plastering on a calm expression that felt like it was cracking at the edges. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She looked up at me, her eyes widening slightly before she broke into another smile, this one forced. "Oh hey babe, you remember Mike, right?" "Mike?" No, I didn't remember Mike. And judging by the smug grin on his face, I didn't want to. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I asked, keeping my tone even. She hesitated, glancing at him before looking back at me. "Can it wait? We're just—" No, I cut her off, my patience hanging by a thread. "Can't." The tension was palpable as she finally stood, muttering something to Mike before following me to a quieter corner of the bar. "What is it, Ryan?" she asked, crossing her arms. Her tone was defensive, like I was the one doing something wrong. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, keeping my voice low. "You're making a fool out of me in front of everyone." Her eyes narrowed. "Oh come on. I'm just having a little fun. Mike's a friend. A friend who's got his hand on your back and your ear in his mouth." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. I'd had enough of her excuses. She rolled her eyes, and that casual dismissal was the final nail in the coffin. "You're overreacting," she said, turning to walk away. "If you're gonna be like this, maybe you should go home." For a moment, I stood there, stunned. She didn't look back as she walked back to Mike, reclaiming her seat like nothing had happened. My vision blurred with a mix of anger and disbelief as I left the bar, my steps heavy and my heart heavier. I hadn't even reached my car when my phone buzzed. Her name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I debated letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity or maybe masochism got the better of me. "Hello?" I answered, my voice flat. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone dripping with fake concern. "I love you, you know?" I hung up without responding. I didn't trust myself to say anything that wouldn't come out as a scream or sob. Her words echoed in my mind as I drove home, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. That night, I sat in the dark living room, the faint hum of the fridge the only sound breaking the silence. Her words kept replaying in my head, mocking me. "Are you okay? I love you." She loved me? No. If she loved me, she wouldn't have humiliated me in front of all those people. If she loved me, she wouldn't have made me feel like a stranger in my own marriage. I didn't know how long I sat there, but by the time I moved, one thing was clear. I couldn't let this go. Not this time. If Sarah thought she could humiliate me and walk away unscathed, she had another thing coming. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Sarah wasn't home yet, and that silence felt like a betrayal all its own. I sat at the kitchen table nursing a cold cup of coffee, replaying the events of the night before in my mind. Her laughter, her dismissive tone, the smug grin on Mike's face. It all gnawed at me, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. By the time Sarah finally walked through the door, it was nearly noon. She wore the same clothes from the night before, and her hair was slightly disheveled. The sight of her made my jaw clench. "Morning," she said casually, as though nothing had happened. I didn't respond, staring at her over the rim of my coffee mug. My silence must have unnerved her, because she shifted awkwardly before heading toward the bedroom. Once I heard the door click shut, I made up my mind. I couldn't just sit and stew in my anger. I needed answers. It started with her phone. It sat on the kitchen counter, charging, the screen dark and still. Sarah had always been protective of her phone, but she was careless when she thought I wasn't looking. I glanced toward the bedroom door before picking it up. Locked, of course. I wasn't surprised, but it was still frustrating. I set it back down, my mind racing. If I couldn't get into her phone, I'd have to find another way. That's when I remembered the laptop. Sarah rarely used it, preferring her phone for everything, but she still kept it in the study for emergencies. I powered it on and was relieved to find it wasn't password protected. The first thing I checked was her email. There wasn't much there, just the usual spam and newsletters, but her sent folder caught my attention. Tucked between work emails was a message to someone named M. The subject line read, "Last night, red heart." My stomach twisted as I opened it. Last night was amazing. I haven't felt this alive in years. Can't wait to see you again. I sat back in the chair, my hands trembling. There it was in black and white. Proof of her betrayal. Over the next few days, I became a man possessed. I checked her phone every chance I got, looking over her shoulder when she texted, making mental notes of the names that popped up on the screen. I kept track of her movements, noting when she left the house and when she came back. It didn't take long to establish a pattern. Sarah had become predictable. She'd leave for her girls' night every Wednesday and Friday, but I knew now that those weren't innocent outings. She'd come home late, her clothes wrinkled and her excuses flimsy. I followed her once, keeping my distance as she drove across town to a cheap motel. I watched from my car as she got out, her posture tense, and met a man at the entrance. It was Mike. Watching them together was like being stabbed in the gut. He greeted her with a kiss, and she melted into him, her body language completely different from how she'd been with me lately. The sight was unbearable, but I forced myself to stay. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal if I was going to figure out what to do next. When Sarah got home that night, I pretended to be asleep. She slipped into bed beside me, the scent of cheap cologne clinging to her skin. My stomach churned, but I stayed still, my breathing steady. The next morning, I confronted her, gently at first. "What's going on with you lately?" I asked over breakfast, keeping my tone neutral. "You've been distant." She didn't even look up from her coffee. "I've just been stressed. Work's been crazy." "Is that all it is?" I pressed because it feels like something more. She finally looked at me, her expression guarded. "What are you trying to say, Ryan?" I held her gaze for a moment, searching for any sign of guilt. "Nothing," I said finally, forcing a smile. "Just worried about you." She seemed to relax, but I didn't miss the flicker of something in her eyes. Suspicion? Fear? Whatever it was, it confirmed what I already knew. She was hiding something. By the end of the week, I had more than enough evidence to confront her. I tracked her movements, read her emails, and even recorded a phone conversation between her and Mike. She was so bold, so careless, that she didn't even try to hide it anymore. But confrontation wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the way I'd felt that night at the bar, small, humiliated, and betrayed. I wanted her to know what it was like to have her world turned upside down. And I wasn't going to stop until she did. The moment I decided to confront Sarah, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't the calm of resolution. It was the quiet before a storm. I knew the storm would hit hard, but I didn't care. It was time to rip the mask off and expose the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I waited until Sunday night. Sarah had been unusually chipper all day, humming to herself as she cleaned the house and cooked dinner. It almost made me laugh. How could she act so normal after everything she'd done? I let her enjoy her charade, knowing it would crumble soon enough. After dinner, I set my plan into motion. We were sitting on the couch, watching some forgettable TV show, when I muted the screen and turned to her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. Sarah glanced at me, her expression curious but cautious. "About what?" I took a deep breath, the words heavy on my tongue. About Mike. Her face froze for a split second before she quickly recovered, forcing a laugh. What about him? He's just a friend. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider her response. A friend? Huh? Is that what you call someone you meet at motels on Wednesday and Friday nights? Her laugh died instantly. The color drained from her face, and she sat up straighter. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Sarah. My voice was cold now, the anger I'd been suppressing bubbling to the surface. I've seen you with him. I followed you to the motel. I've read your emails, listened to your phone calls. I know everything. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted around the room, as though looking for an escape. I can explain, she finally whispered, her voice shaky. Explain. I leaned forward, my gaze locked on hers. Go ahead. Explain why my wife has been sneaking around with another man. Explain why you've been lying to my face and humiliating me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, her voice trembling. It just got out of hand. That's your excuse? It got out of hand? I barked a bitter laugh. You've been betraying me for months, Sarah. Do you even understand what you've done? She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I never wanted to hurt you. Then why did you do it? I demanded, my voice rising. Why, Sarah? Was I not enough for you? Did you get bored of me? Her sobs grew louder, but she didn't answer. The sight of her crying used to break my heart, but now it only fueled my anger. You didn't even try to hide it, I continued. You paraded him around in public, flirted with him in front of our friends. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Or did you just not care? I don't know, she whispered through her tears. I wasn't thinking. I was stupid and selfish, and I ruined everything. You're damn right you did, I snapped, standing up. And now you're going to face the consequences. Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face filled with fear. What do you mean? I mean you're leaving this house tonight, I said, my tone ice cold. Pack your things and go. I don't want to see you again until I decide what to do about this. Ryan, please. No. I cut her off, my voice thunderous. You don't get to plead with me, Sarah. Not after what you've done. She stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, it looked like she might argue. But then she nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay, she said quietly. I'll go. I watched as she packed a bag, her movements slow and robotic. She didn't look at me as she left the house, and I didn't say a word. When the door closed behind her, the silence was deafening. I sank onto the couch, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. Part of me wanted to believe her tears were genuine, that she truly regretted what she'd done. But another part of me, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, knew I couldn't trust her words. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If Sarah thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she was in for a rude awakening. I wasn't just going to let her hurt me and move on with her life. No, she was going to pay for what she'd done. And I was going to make sure of it. The house was eerily quiet after Sarah left. For the first time in years, I had it all to myself, but instead of feeling relief, I felt the gnawing void of betrayal. The hurt ran deep, but the anger burned hotter. That anger became my fuel, driving me to plot a revenge so thorough that she'd regret ever crossing me. Started small. I needed her to feel the same sense of unease and humiliation she'd inflicted on me. The first step was feigning reconciliation, luring her into a false sense of security while I laid the groundwork for her downfall. A week after she moved out, I texted her, "We need to talk. Can you come by the house?" Her response was almost immediate. "Yes. I'm so sorry, Ryan. I'll be there tonight." That evening, she arrived looking worn and nervous, her eyes searching mine for any sign of forgiveness. I greeted her at the door, calm and composed, a stark contrast to the chaos inside me. "Thanks for coming," I said, motioning her to the couch. "I've been thinking a lot." "So have I," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Ryan, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to make things right. I'll do whatever it takes." I studied her face, pretending to consider her words. It's not that simple, Sarah. You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed my trust. I need time to figure out if this is something I can get past. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I understand. I'll wait as long as it takes. I offered her a small, reluctant smile. We'll see. For now, let's just take it one step at a time. She looked relieved, her shoulders relaxing slightly. What she didn't know was that this was the first step in my plan. I wasn't offering her a second chance. I was setting the stage for her reckoning. I began by subtly turning our mutual friends against her. Over the next few weeks, I started planting seeds of doubt in their minds. I didn't come out and tell them about her affair. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I dropped hints. She's been distant lately, I'd say during casual conversations. I think there's something she's not telling me. Our friends were quick to pick up on my cues. The whispers started almost immediately, and it wasn't long before Sarah became the subject of speculation. I could see it in their faces when we all gathered for a mutual friend's party. The sideways glances, the forced smiles. Sarah noticed too. She clung to me that night, desperate for reassurance, but I offered her none. The next step was more personal. I knew how much she loved her social media presence. It was her way of curating a picture-perfect image of her life. So I hacked into her accounts. It wasn't difficult. She'd always used the same passwords. Once inside, I deleted her photos with Mike and replaced them with carefully chosen pictures of us, all captioned with messages like, "Working through the tough times." It painted a picture of a loving couple trying to rebuild, but it was a lie meant to keep her tethered to me while exposing her to scrutiny. The most calculated move came a month later. I invited her to meet me at a coffee shop near her workplace. She was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed. When she arrived, I was already seated, sipping a coffee and scrolling through my phone. "Thanks for coming," I said, gesturing to the seat across from me. "I'll always come if it means we can talk," she replied, her voice hopeful. We made small talk for a while, but I could see the nervousness in her eyes. She was waiting for me to say something about us, to give her a sign of where we stood. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and said, "I have something for you." Her eyes lit up as I slid an envelope across the table. "What is it?" she asked, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside was a series of printouts, emails, and text conversations between her and Mike, along with photos I'd taken of them at the motel. Her face paled as she flipped through the pages, her breathing quick and shallow. What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Proof," I said calmly. "Proof of what you've done. Proof that you're not the person you pretend to be." Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked around the coffee shop, as if realizing for the first time that we weren't alone. The humiliation was written all over her face, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I thought we were trying to fix things." "Fix things," I repeated, leaning forward. "You don't fix things by sweeping them under the rug, Sarah. You fix them by facing the consequences of your actions." Her tears flowed freely now, but I didn't care. This was just the beginning. I had more plans, each one designed to chip away at the carefully constructed life she'd built. She'd hurt me in ways I couldn't put into words, and now it was her turn to feel the weight of that pain. As she left the coffee shop, clutching the envelope to her chest, I watched her go with a sense of grim satisfaction. She thought she could rebuild what we had, but what she didn't realize was that I wasn't interested in rebuilding. I was interested in retribution, and I was just getting started. The coffee shop confrontation was only the beginning. Watching Sarah crumble under the weight of her humiliation was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the same crushing despair she had inflicted on me. Over the next few weeks, my plans unfolded like clockwork, each move calculated to dismantle her life piece by piece. The first blow was financial. Our joint accounts had always been a symbol of trust between us, but now they were my weapon. I shifted all but the bare minimum into an account she couldn't access. Legally, everything was in my name, and she'd never taken the time to question it. When she discovered the missing funds, she called me in a panic. "Ryan, The bank says there's hardly anything left in our joint account, she said, her voice tinged with desperation. What's going on? I moved the money, I said flatly. I didn't think it was fair for you to keep benefiting from my hard work after what you've done. Her silence was deafening, and when she finally spoke, her voice was a broken whisper. You can't just leave me with nothing. You should have thought about that before you started sleeping with Mike. I replied coldly. You'll get enough to survive, Sarah, but that's all. The financial blow forced her to move out of the apartment she'd rented after leaving our house. She ended up crashing on a friend's couch, a far cry from the comfortable life she'd grown accustomed to. The next strike came socially. Sarah had always prided herself on being the life of the party, the one everyone wanted around. But after the seeds I'd planted with our mutual friends, her social circle began to shrink. Invitations to gatherings stopped coming, and when she reached out to friends, they gave vague excuses or didn't respond at all. One evening, I got a call from her. Ryan, she said, her voice trembling. I don't know what you've been telling people, but no one will talk to me anymore. Please, can we at least stay civil? I let out a bitter laugh. Civil? Was it civil when you paraded your affair in front of me? Was it civil when you humiliated me in front of our friends at the bar? She started to say something but stopped, realizing there was no point. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't know what else to say. Sorry doesn't fix what you've done, Sarah, I said. Enjoy your new reality. Her relationship with Mike began to unravel next. I hadn't needed to lift a finger for this one. He was as much a coward as I suspected. When Sarah's financial struggles and social fallout became apparent, Mike stopped answering her calls. She confided in one of her remaining friends, who still happened to talk to me occasionally. Sarah's a wreck, her friend said over coffee one afternoon. Mike's ghosting her, and she's convinced you're behind it. I smirked. If I'm the bad guy in her story, I'll wear that badge proudly. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was working late at the office when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. I need to see you. Please. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. When I got home, she was waiting on the porch, drenched from the rain and shivering. Her once vibrant demeanor was gone, replaced by someone who looked defeated. Ryan, she said, her voice hoarse. I'm sorry. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. I don't have anyone left. I've lost everything. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. What do you want from me, Sarah? I want to fix this, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll cut ties with everyone who's hurt us. Just please let me prove that I can be better. For the first time, her desperation felt genuine. But I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. Do you even understand the damage you've done? I asked, my voice low. You didn't just hurt me, Sarah. You destroyed everything we built together. She nodded, her sobs choking her words. I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But please don't give up on me. I stared at her, my emotions a swirling mess of anger, satisfaction, and something I couldn't quite name. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, but another part, buried deep, wanted to believe she could change. Go home, Sarah, I said finally, my voice void of emotion. I'll think about it. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. With a small nod, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The revenge had been satisfying, but now that it was almost complete, I felt an emptiness I hadn't anticipated. Breaking her down had been easy, too easy. But what came next? Could I move on, knowing the destruction I'd caused? Or was this the beginning of something darker? A path I couldn't turn back from? The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside me, and for the first time, I began to question whether revenge was truly worth the cost. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows and drowning the house in its roar. But inside, it was quiet, too quiet. I sat in the dim light of the living room, the rain drumming against the glass, as I sipped a whiskey that did little to dull the ache inside me. The anger and satisfaction I'd felt during my revenge had ebbed, replaced by something hollow and cold. Sarah's broken expression from earlier replayed in my mind, her voice trembling with desperation. "I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Please don't give up on me." Part of me scoffed at her words. She had brought this on herself. She had lied, cheated, and humiliated me. But another part, a quieter, insistent voice, asked a harder question: was I any better? The next morning, I went through my usual routine. Coffee, shower, a quick breakfast. I had a meeting scheduled at work, but my focus was elsewhere. I kept thinking about Sarah, soaked and sobbing on my porch. For weeks, I'd been consumed by the need to make her suffer, to show her the depth of the pain she'd caused me. But now that I'd succeeded, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lost. As I drove to the office, I noticed Sarah's car parked outside the diner we used to frequent together. Something pulled at me, and before I could second-guess myself, I parked and walked in. She was sitting at a booth, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. She looked thinner, her face drawn and pale, as though the life had been drained from her. She didn't notice me until I was standing at her table. "Ryan," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and apprehension. "What are you doing here?" "I don't know," I admitted, sliding into the seat across from her. "But we need to talk." She nodded slowly, wrapping her hands around the coffee cup as if for warmth. "Okay." For a while, neither of us spoke. I studied her face, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the one who had betrayed me. She looked like a shadow of herself, and for the first time, I wondered if I had taken things too far. "Why did you do it?" I asked finally, my voice soft but steady. "Why Mike? Why any of it?" She stared into her coffee, her brow furrowed. "I don't have a good answer," she said after a long pause. "I was bored. I was selfish. I don't know, I thought I could have both, the thrill of something new and the stability of what we had." Her honesty surprised me. I expected excuses or deflection, but instead, she looked at me with raw, unfiltered regret. "I never wanted to hurt you," she continued, her voice cracking. "I didn't realize how much I'd lose until it was too late." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You didn't just hurt me, Sarah. You broke me. You made me feel like I wasn't enough, like our marriage meant nothing to you." Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself for that." "Good," I said coldly. "You shouldn't." We sat in silence for a while, the tension between us almost unbearable. I wanted to hate her, to hold on to my anger, but it was slipping through my fingers. Seeing her like this, so vulnerable, so broken, made it harder to cling to my resentment. She wasn't the woman who had laughed in Mike's arms at the bar. She was something else now, something fragile and human. "Do you really want to fix this?" I asked finally. Her head shot up, her eyes wide. "Yes," she said fervently. "More than anything." "Then prove it," I said, leaning forward. "You've lost my trust, Sarah, and it's going to take a hell of a lot to get it back. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. If you're not willing to do that, then this conversation is over." "I'll do it," she said without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes." I studied her, looking for any sign of insincerity, but all I saw was determination. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that we could rebuild what she had destroyed. But another part warned me that it was a fool's hope. In the weeks that followed, Sarah began to make good on her promise. She started seeing a therapist and even convinced me to attend a few sessions with her. They were painful and uncomfortable, forcing us to confront the cracks in our marriage that had been there long before her affair. Slowly, tentatively, we began to rebuild. But it wasn't easy. I couldn't forget the images of her with Mike, the lies she'd told, the nights I spent alone wondering where she was. Trust was a fragile thing, and though she worked tirelessly to earn it back, I wasn't sure if it could ever be fully restored. Months later, I stood in the doorway of our kitchen, watching her cook dinner. She looked different now, more grounded, more real. The vibrant, carefree woman I had fallen in love with was gone, replaced by someone who had been through the fire and come out the other side. "I love you," she said suddenly, looking over her shoulder. Her voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I hesitated before responding, the words heavy on my tongue. I know, I said finally. I'm just not sure if I can say it back yet. She nodded, her expression sad but understanding. I'll wait, she said softly. And in that moment, I realized something. Revenge might have given me momentary satisfaction, but it hadn't healed the wound. Healing was a much longer, harder process, one that required both of us to rebuild from the ashes. Whether or not we'd succeed, I didn't know. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Thank you for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to hit the like button. It only takes a second, but it means a world to us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our upcoming videos. Something brand new is dropping tomorrow. And hit the notification bell to among the first to see it. See you in the next video.